see you.
Avatar: Fire and Ash is now streaming on Disney+. It's the film critics are calling the best Avatar yet.
Yeah! Go, 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 go!
A true epic and completely jaw-dropping.
This is the only pure thing in this world.
Return to Pandora on Disney+.
It will be an adventure for the whole family.
And watch the Oscar-winning phenomenon at home.
This is sick!
Avatar: Fire and Ash, now streaming on Disney+. Rated PG-13.
Study and play come together on a Windows 11 PC. And for a limited time, college students get the best of both worlds. Get the Unreal College Deal. Everything you need to study and play with select Windows 11 PCs. Eligible students get a year of Microsoft 365 Premium and a year of Xbox Game Pass Ultimate with a custom color Xbox wireless controller. Learn more at windows.com/student offer. While supplies last. Ends June 30th. Terms at aka.ms/collegepc.
the Edfu documents on the history of the Egyptian temple. The walls of Egyptian temples from the Greco-Roman period contain numerous ritual texts, among which appears a series of inscriptions that exist only in abbreviated form in certain pharaonic temples. These texts provide a reasonably complete history of the construction of each temple and describe the layout of its rooms and halls, along with their ritual purposes and significance. While many temples of the later periods feature these texts, they are nowhere as numerous or extensive as the Temple of Edfu, making it our most important source. The Edfu documents feature large building texts, always inscribed in bold characters. They often use the decorative Ptolemaic script in broad bands on prominent architectural elements, such as the exterior of the naos or the inner and outer faces of the enclosure wall. These texts primarily, though not exclusively, recount the history of the temple's construction and provide a generalized picture of the temple's rooms and dimensions. In addition to these general descriptions, each room or hall has its own building text engraved on prominent features, like door jambs. These texts briefly describe the room's name, nature, ritual significance, and, in some cases, decoration. Combining the major and minor building texts allows it to outline the temple's nature and significance. This foundation enables a deeper study of life within the temple and the significance of the historical temple rituals. The texts do not solely present facts about the historical temple. Occasionally, they hint at certain mythological events. The first hint appears in the building text of the naos, which describes the historical temple's foundation, construction, and animation as events occurring in a mythical age. The gods depict the historical temple as a mythical creation. This record suggests a belief that the historical temple was a direct continuation, projection, and reflection of a mythical temple that came into existence at the dawn of time. Further evidence supports this idea of a mythological context for the historical temple. People often describe the Edfu temple with the names of mythical shrines and sacred places. These names are not incidental, as they replace the temple's typical name in key texts, such as the main building texts and the morning hymns recited during daily temple life. This naming practice points to deeper reasons, suggesting a belief in a relationship between the temple at Edfu and the sacred places of a mythical past. The building text on the inner face of the enclosure wall provides more conclusive evidence, recording two mythological events from primeval times. The origin of the Temple of Horus, the Beditite, directly links to these events. One event recounts the origin of a primeval resting place of the falcon, while the other describes life in the primeval domain of the falcon. This building text concludes with a description of the events believed to have led to the foundation of the solar temple. A ritual scene on the north wall, west side, of the inner face of the enclosure wall further illustrates the role of the mythical past in the life of the historical temple. In this scene, we see Thoth, also known as Thoth, twice great, Lord of Eshmunen, sweet of tongue, efficacious of speech, offering a sacred book to Horus the Beditite and saying, "I came to you, O my father the Beditite. You issued me as your child. I bring thee the charter for magnifying thy domain from the reign of Tannin until the present day." The temples bear the name of the sanctified God, who came into existence at the first occasion. The scene also features a spell that alludes to another mythological event, implying that these are the words of Re, who proclaimed, "Settle down beside me." And gladness is in the fields of Jeba. The crew declared, "Our Lord's name is Horus." Thoth's offering of a sacred book recalls a sacred text that the building text of the enclosure wall at Edfu refers to. This book, titled Bielwuri Ngsprw, or the Sacred Book of the Temples, did not detail temple rituals or the structural development of the Edfu temple. Instead, the surviving portions reveal it contained lists of mythical shrines and sacred places, each name accompanied by a brief explanation of its mythological significance. This book may have codified traditions and beliefs about ancient sacred places, later adapted for the historical temples. This evidence points to continuity and a relationship between the historical temple and distant sacred places of mythological origin. We have identified several related texts using clues from these inscriptions. At Edfu, an extensive series of inscriptions provides detailed accounts of the temple's steeple's mythological origin, shedding valuable light on how the Egyptians viewed the temple and its beginnings. The temple contains these largely unknown and untranslated texts, with the most significant ones situated in the third, uppermost, register of the east and west walls on the inner face of the enclosure wall. These texts are cosmogonical and divided into 5 sections, each associated with a ritual scene. Their arrangement suggests a definite order, alternating between the west and east walls of the temple. The first cosmogonical record is probably located on the west wall, associated with a scene of adoration for the sanctified god, believed to have come into existence at the first occasion. The temple walls depict Jeba, a primeval sacred site in Wetchizet Nater, along with all the divine beings believed to dwell there, as the location of this adoration. The second record, located on the west wall, depicts the offering of an oblation to the divine beetle and the gods in his retinue. The left portion of the scene depicts the king presenting offerings to the protective deities, while the right portion showcases another adoration scene of the sanctified god, referred to as the Great Falcon of the Primeval Age and associated with Ptah. Elevating the choice pieces of meat is the title of the third record on the east wall. This adoration scene mirrors the second record's depiction of a similar act. One of the temple's foundational rituals, the stretching of the cord over the temple, is associated with the fourth record. The ritual text accompanies this relief, which depicts the king, Thoth, and Seshat, laying the foundation for the great seat of Harakta. The scene features the procession of the builder gods and seated figures of the Ogdoad on the right side. The fifth record appears in a scene titled Adorning the Festival Hall, featuring the figures of Horus, the Beditite, Hathor, and Ptah seated in a kiosk. The king presents them with the best symbol. Surrounding them is an assembly of gods, and a procession of 30 gods follows the king in front of them. The front section of the Proneos features 2 extracts from these same records. Collectively, these records form a connected set of mythological narratives, with extracts and adapted versions found throughout the Edfu temple. The Edfu temple incorporates them into ritual texts used during the worship of the ancestor gods and in the lotus offering scenes. Additionally, the main building texts contain concise or modified versions of these cosmogonical narratives, often appearing alongside lists of mythological names. It seems likely that this extensive collection of documents originally formed part of a single book, referred to as SSR Ut N PWT TPT, or Specification of the Mounds of the Early Primeval Age. The Edfu inscriptions only mention this book, but there are compelling reasons to believe its significance extended beyond the Edfu temple. This book differed from the typical temple service books, as its name does not appear in the catalog of texts stored in the temple library at Edfu. It likely originated differently from the sacred texts called the Sacred Books of Atum. The cosmogonical records at Edfu are characterized as having divine origin. The introduction to the first Edfu cosmic record reveals the tradition that these records were considered the words of the sages. It states that the sacred book was believed to be a copy of writings made by Thoth, based on the teachings of the sages of Meweret. The use of the plural it, mounds, suggests that this book contained, among other things, lists of cultic sites thought to have been established in prehistory. It can be tentatively suggested that in this context, the expression IWT PWT TPT, or sacred mounds of the early primeval age, was a general term used to describe the prehistoric cult sites of Egypt. Upon close examination, it becomes evident that the Edfu version of this sacred book combines 2 myths into a single continuous narrative, though they may have originally been separate. Summarized versions of these myths, incorporated into the building texts on the inner face of the enclosure wall, are labeled with the titles Sacred Book BWR of the early primeval age of gods and the coming of Re to his mansion of Miss NBT. Other sources do not contain these titles, indicating that the Edfu records have preserved portions of these myths. The first two records, and part of the fifth, seem to represent a significant portion of the myth from the sacred book of the early primeval age of gods, which relates to the origin of the sacred domains and temples of the Falcon. Records 3 and 4, along with the remainder of the fifth, likely correspond to a second myth, explaining the origins of the solar temples in the coming of Re to his mansion of Mimzenbt. These titles and traditions are likely not unique to Edfu, nor do they seem to be of a later date. Their significance suggests that the sacred book of specification of the sacred mounds later integrated two originally independent myths. An analysis of the surviving portions of the sacred book shows that it primarily focused on interpreting the origins of the sacred places of the Falcon and the Sun God. It also includes accounts and explanations of various mythical events believed to have preceded the foundation of these sacred domains. The book describes the early temples believed to have evolved at these sacred sites. These descriptions enable the reconstruction of the physical development of these temples over time. It is unlikely that the Edfu tradition's cosmological records preserve the complete version of the original myths. The texts at Edfu likely represent summaries or epitomes of the most important parts of these myths, containing only extracts considered vital from the Egyptian perspective. However, the Edfu documents pave the way for a new field of study known as the mythological history of Egyptian sacred places and their temples. This work does not include full translations and commentaries due to the complexity and length of the original sources. A proper philological study of these texts would require a separate volume of considerable size and expense. However, given their significance, we present a comprehensive overview of the primary Edfu cosmological documents here. The myth about the origin of the domains and the Temple of the Falcon is fascinating. This myth forms the content of the first and second cosmogonical records and part of the fifth record, which likely originated in the sacred book of the early primeval age of gods. The Edfu myth is a unique source that reveals Egyptian tradition concerning the origin of the Falcon's sacred domains and the creation of his first temple. It is unclear whether the beginning of the first Edfu record preserves the original commencement of the myth. The Edfu texts appear to have omitted some interpretations of earlier mythological events, which may have preceded the first events recorded. Nevertheless, the part of the myth that survives in the Edfu inscriptions alludes to a continuous sequence of mythical events presented in an abbreviated form. Each section of the records seems to illustrate a specific period in the development of the primeval domains of the Falcon, which we will attempt to follow here. The primeval island of trampling. The first record, associated with a scene of the sanctified god's worship, who came into being at the first occasion, depicts a primeval island, IW, primarily known as the Island of Trampling, AWTT. This island also goes by two additional names: the Island of Combat, EWCB, and the Island of Peace, WBP. The Island of Trampling is known only from the first Edfu cosmogonical record, and these three names do not recur in the main body of the myth. The primeval waters, BBBT, known as Wiakret, appear to have enveloped the island in darkness. Two divine beings, Wa and Ka, led to the island when light emerged and the waters became radiant. People refer to them as the two companions of the divine of heart, WL entry Ib, and attribute their leadership to a group of divine beings known as the Shebtayu. These two beings observed reeds at the edge of the primeval waters, with a god named Ai-Torbur above them. They landed at a location named Gezwakret, which became their first home. Tradition regarded Wa and Ka as the lords of the island of trampling, fashioning of the perch, Jebba. The creation of the Jebba, perch, resulted from planting a slip of the split reed in the primordial waters. The description of the reed in the water as the reed that uplifts the god, NBIWJ's NTR, equated it with the relic, IBT, of a deity named This One, PN, who was the overlord of the DD pillar. Another deity, Ka, arrived and performed a protection rite, NHP, likely with the help of Wa and Ka. Wetjeset cites these events as the origin of the cultic place named Jeba. The text states, the perch in Wetjeset is referred to as the slip of reed. Thus, Jeba in Wetjeset became the name of this domain, Newt, greatly influenced by the waterflood in the fields surrounding the Reed region. The myth's abbreviated versions suggest that this description upholds the tradition about the creation of the seat of the first occasion, Saint NSPTPY, for the falcon, the god for whom the Jeba perch, a resting place of reed, represents. Events following the creation of the first sacred place.
When you need to build up your team to handle the growing chaos at work, use Indeed Sponsored Jobs. It gives your job post the boost it needs to be seen and helps reach people with the right skills, certifications, and more. Spend less time searching and more time actually interviewing candidates who check all your boxes. Listeners of this show will get a $75 sponsored job credit at Indeed.com/podcast. That's Indeed.com/podcast. Terms and conditions apply. Need a hiring hero? This is a job for Indeed Sponsored Jobs.
After Jeba was created in Wetjeset the sanctified ruler, BNTRI, appeared. As a protector, he emerged from the underworld, DWN, bearing a striking resemblance to the Neger. The sacred place became known as the underworld of the soul, dwelt NB. The Shebtiu praised the divine falcon, saying, "Who hails from the underworld?" inquired the Shebtiu. "The underworld of the soul is this place," said the falcon. Thus, the underworld of the soul became the name of this domain. Following this, immense joy spread across the island, now called the Great Foundation Ground of the Ruler of the Wing. On the island, the Lord of the Wing, NDB, arrived and presented his blessed offerings to the Lord of the Perch, NBDJB. An abbreviated version describes the same event differently, adding more detail. The story claims that the Ka manifested as the flying Ba, with a face like that of Nefer-Her. The two Shebtiu responded with a show of acclamation. He approached the Lord of Jeba and offered offerings, IBT, from his mouth, hoping to unite with the sky of Im, whose origin is unknown. He gave thanks for the dirty falcon upon the willow. Despite hearing his voice, no one had seen him. Known as the underworld of the soul, the union of the primeval falcon with the soul, the flying Ba, is considered the first significant event in Jeba, the place of uniting of the company. An allusion to another mythical event follows. The text appears to only retain a heading that alludes to the events at BWSM D. JSW, the location where the company unites. The precise meaning of the name is unclear. The term D, GSW, tentatively translated as company, might refer to a group of divine beings who had passed away. However, no relevant text clarifies its significance. The text then describes the falcon as wandering through the place. It remains uncertain whether this refers to the foundation of a specific settlement, or whether the BW place simply denotes the original Wetjeset Nader. The BW place may also be located elsewhere on the island of Trampling. This section concludes with a spell, which appears to be a later interpretation, likely from the Edfu tradition. It declares, Horus the Bedetite is the lord of Jeba. The Jeba represents the Bedet, while the Bedetite is known as the Flying Ba, the ruler of the wing. Creation of the first Payland and the origin of the great prehistoric monument. The revelation of the sanctified ruler and the lord of the wing marked a significant phase in developing the first primeval sacred place. We depict the next stage as an act of creation, referring to the appearance of the first land upon the foundation ground of the ruler of the wing. This land is likely one of the 11 IBW fields mentioned earlier in the record, which were submerged under the water. The utterance of names, likely by Wa and Ka, is associated with the creation of this land. As a result of this act, a new domain, and Naut, Blessed Island and Herioti, came into being. They then hailed the falcon as the lord of this new domain. The verbs BPR, to come into being, and DJC, to give, suggests that this event symbolizes the Egyptian concept of creating sacred ground. We refer to the uttered spells, NIS, as JJSW, meaning learned or sacred spells. This stage of creation also included the ceremony of naming the DD pillar. The Shebtu once again recited sacred names, including Kenem Aten and Teptoi. These names might have been believed to generate additional paylands, though the text is unclear whether these names refer specifically to the paylands or to sacred places already existing on the created land. The narrative invites the falcon to arrive at PB in that newly formed domain. The subsequent stage involves the emergence of the Great Primeval Mound, BCYWIR. This event is also known as Place Where the Enemies Were Annihilated, Territory of the Ancestor, and Land of Him Who is Great of Arm. These names likely represent the sacred places created on the mound, or the mythological events believed to have occurred there. Despite the text's lack of explicit mention, we can infer that the Shebtu, as the primary creators mentioned in this context, were responsible for this creation. With the creation of the Great Primeval Mound, a significant phase in the development of the earliest sacred world of the gods ended. Assuming the kingship of the Ka. Following the emergence of the Great Primeval Mound, the enemy arrived in the form of a snake. Time appears to have passed between the mound's creation and the appearance of this enemy, but the details of the events within Wetjesetneter's original domain remain unclear. We can surmise that a sacred act took place within this primeval Jebba, where the falcon assumed the kingship of the Ka. This hypothesis is based solely on the expression HNM-BPT, and while much of the description is unclear, it appears that the Ka revealed sacred matters to the falcon. However, the nature of these sacred revelations remains ambiguous. The abbreviated version offers a clue. The falcon informed his followers of the praises of Re, which the Ka had commanded Badi for him in Jeba. Revelation of the protector god and the god of the temple. When the enemy snake appeared, the Shebtu recited sacred spells once again. As a result, a protective deity known as NTRBN, protector god, appeared, who was described as the likeness of the Radiant One with a face like Ifeterbear. The abbreviated version provides additional information, as follows. Men say that the protector god appeared in Jeba to protect the god within Wetjesetneter in his capacity as the Segeme. In later traditions, Ta took the place of this protector. Following this, another deity, the god of the temple, IQA 81, arrived on the scene. Others describe him as the likeness of the Radiant One with a face like Ifeterbear. His true name appears to be PTB Nwit, which means he who created the primitive water. The next stage of creation involved the PTB MVYT water, created by the creator, PTB. The creator imbued this water with protective powers after vanquishing the enemy snake, setting out the SB JT enclosure. Following the enemy's attack on the sacred area, the narrative describes the creation and shaping of the original domain of the island. The narrative alludes to the creation of an SBBT enclosure and the excavation of a channel that holds water of a particular type, which has been sanctified against the snake. The Divine Heart's agency created the MW water through this event. Revelation of Tannin. Next, the record introduces the Lord of Creation, NBPTB, a crucial section given its lack of known parallels. We identify the Lord of Creation as Tannin. The text implies that Tannin's emergence, seemingly triggered by a spell, occurred after the creation of the water, MW. The text notes, Tannin was led forth, BS, as a protection, SJE, when the Shebtu said, he is Tannin, the revered one. After the Shebtu pronounced this spell, Tannin rose from the water. The following passage describes events that took place in Wetjesetneter after the revelation of Tannin and the creation of protective waters. The text suggests that Wetjesetneter holds additional significance as the site of the restoration of the ancestors. However, it remains unclear who these ancestors were. The field where these events occurred appears to have been a place of protection. Mention is made of a shelter, NHT, created as a defense for the creator, represented by Hrekshield WJT, the member of the progenitor. We record the shelter's dimensions as 5 by 15 cubits. The following description outlines the events that are believed to have transpired in this same field following the sheltering of the symbol of creation. The mansion of Isden and the decayed temple. The next event involved the construction of the planned structure. The text mentions a mansion, known as the Mansion of Isden, with only the section's title remaining unaltered. The text implies the construction of another god's house in the same field, close to the creator's shelter. The statement, entering by the god of the temple into what was in decay, suggests that this mansion had been found in a ruined or decayed state. The falcon invested as the successor of the Earthmaker. The enemy snake is now attacking Wetcheset Nader's domain, and the defenseless header-bear is under intense pressure. In response, Tannen created 2 divinities, Segameb and Sekhem-Her, which symbolize 2 staffs, LBW, tasked with protecting the island by repelling danger. This passage is crucial as it explains the origin of the spear in historical times, which is believed to have evolved from these protective staffs bestowed by Tannen. The following scene illustrates the Earthmaker presenting the mace, known as the Great White, BDWR, to his son, the Falcon. This is the only evidence that connects this mace to the Earthmaker, suggesting it was initially a symbol of his sovereignty. It's noteworthy that the creation narrative only mentions the Earthmaker and does not depict him as an active figure. Tannen then introduced 2 additional symbols, the Nidor's pillar and the similitude of the front of God, while placing another symbol in front of the god of the temple. If this location is indeed the same shelter mentioned earlier, it implies that the ceremony of presenting the Earthmaker's mace and other symbols to the falcon took place in the creator's shelter, in the presence of the god of the temple. We consider this shelter the domain's most sacred. Visiting the place for constructing. Following the shelter ceremony, there is a reference to BBWHNM, but its exact meaning remains unclear. We can tentatively interpret it as a command to visit the place for construction. The text implies that the god of the temple summoned the Shebtai Wa and Ka, bestowing upon them the power of fashioning, NBP, and a command to visit this place. However, much of this statement remains enigmatic. The Shebtai appears to have initiated the process by naming substances, commonly referred to as IBT. They also uttered invocations, including one to the arm, likely alluding to a worship ritual directed at the creator before undertaking a new act of creation for the lands. They describe these invocations as BSI Re, which translates to praise of Re. Creation of the Paylands. The next significant phase is the creation of the Paylands, led primarily by the Shebtiu. Their function is DMIBT, to name or create the elements. Their work seems to radiate from the BWHNM, place for constructing. Next, they list the lands and sacred places they create. 1. The Mound of the Radiant One. 2. The Island of Re. 3. The Pillar of the Earth. 4. The High Hill. 5. The Oil Tree. 6. He who is rich in Kas. 7. Mesen. 8. He who makes prosperous places. 9. Bedet, also known as the first of the mounds, is believed to be in the presence of the primordial deities. 10. The place, BW, of the ghosts. Following this act of creation, the sages, GJSW, are believed to have magnified, IBT, the things created, possibly due to the magical protection placed upon these newly formed Paylands and their sacred places. The narrative then transitions to the creation of more Paylands, including 1. The Great Seat was the site of enemy annihilation. 2. The Throne, Est. 3. The second Great Primeval Mound, BCYBR, bears the names Territory of the Circuit and Great Place, BWR. The meadow subsequently grew radiant. Visit the BWHNM. Following the creation of the Paylands, there is another reference to BBBWHNM, although its exact meaning is still unclear. This could imply the establishment of a sacred settlement. Tannin summoned the Shebti-W, leading them to a location known as the Place, BW, of Wa, which subsequently evolved into the Place of the Throne, BWBMR. They conducted rites before a willow and brought in offerings. The text reads, "Appearing in speed, coming close to the willow. We present our offerings to the arm." An enclosure, SBTI, was erected around this location, and the builder gods appeared. Moments of acclamation and offerings led to the lifting of the sacred lance and the performance of a protection ritual. The willow uplifted the falcon and conducted other protective rites, seemingly referencing the creation of sacred symbols believed to protect the falcon in his seat upon the willow. The gods allegedly created these symbols by naming unspecified objects, enshrining the willow, and safeguarding the place of the throne. Creation of the Payland of Wetjeset Neter. This section begins with a mention of the ghosts, builders, gods, and Shebtu. Ghosts or pillars likely refer to divine entities in a specific part of the island. Their presence appears to be associated with the impending phase of creation. The Shebtau continued their creative work by reciting names and spells. The description places them in a location of special significance, known as BW-IBT, the place where the earth's things were filled with power. As a result of their sacred utterances, the primeval water, BBBT, receded, and a Payland emerged. The divine beings, accompanied by the Falcon's crew, approached the Babieti, place of the primitive water, where Heterbur also arrived. This Badabu place might have been located at the edge of the Payland, similar to the field of reeds on the original island. The text states that the DD pillar once stood in this BW place, but a reed perch known as the DBS perch now stands in its place. The falcon arrived and was uplifted by the perch, and the Payland was named. The SNBT place provided protection for the gods. This act marked the conclusion of creation, leading the divine beings to the enshrined location of the deed pillar of the reed. Setting down in the pastures. Though damaged and enigmatic, the subsequent text seems to describe the settling down of the falcon and his crew on the Payland of Wetjeset Neder. The Shebtu appear to have sailed away, leaving the falcon's crew to protect the newly formed land. The description of the crew as ND-IBT, protecting the things, is ambiguous in this context. The abbreviated version reveals that upon arriving, the crew greeted the Ka of the land, having seen him in the land. The falcon then welcomed them and invited them to settle beside him. They looked after the IBT of the pasture, which served as the falcon's dwelling. The falcon discussed the IBT and described how the Shebtu in Wetjeset Neter had crafted the Jeba perch. The falcon ruled as the child of Heterbear upon the DD pillar of reed, and his crew acclaimed him as Lord, NDM. They declared the Jeba perch, the place the Ka had bequeathed to the falcon, as properly constructed. Foundation of the Temple of Wetjeset Neter. This section of the myth likely deals with the foundation of a mansion of the god within the Payland of Wetjeset Neter, described at the end of the 5th record in the Edfu version. The first record interprets the origin of Wetjeset Neter, which may have been the same land mentioned during Tannin's reign. The same sacred book that chronicles the creation of the falcon's sacred domains also describes the ground plan of this mansion. The title of the record reads, "In the presence of Re-Si, they laid out the foundation ground at the temple of Wetjeset Neter during Tannin's reign, following the guidelines found in the book known as the Specification of the Sacred Mounds of the Early Primeval Age. 24 gods, including the Ogdoad, Seshat, the 7 builder gods, Thoth, and the 7 sages, assisted in laying the foundation." The title suggests an allusion to 2 primitive temples, the first founded and constructed during the mythical reign of Tannin. Another temple appears to have reused this type of construction. It is said that the temple stood within a vast enclosure, INB, encircling a smaller inner enclosure that housed the actual temple. The temple probably consisted of 2 units, with the back part being more significant and possibly older. Positioned on the main axis at the temple's steeple's rear, the chief sanctuary, BWT Nai, measured 30 cubits from west to east and 20 cubits from south to north. Despite the text's damage, it's likely that a large courtyard preceded this sanctuary, potentially featuring smaller sanctuaries on its inner sides. The front section of the mansion, though heavily damaged in the text, boasts 2 halls. The inner hall, measuring 50 by 45 cubits, had 2 side chapels, each 30 by 30 cubits. In front of this was a smaller pillared hall, measuring 30 by 15 cubits, which may also have side rooms. However, the description ends here. Events in the Payland of Jeba. The second record concerns events believed to have occurred in the Payland of Jeba. This Payland may have surrounded the island of Trampling, but the narrative does not specify how. The Edfu records do not detail the origin of this Payland, suggesting a similar interpretation to Wetcheset Nater's Payland. His crew hails the Falcon as the Lord, NDM, at the beginning of this record, referring to the land as his territory, WW. He ruled there as the child of Heterbear. Interestingly, only the Paylands use the name Heterbear. The Falcon then spoke to his crew, seemingly revealing the divine words of the Ka, followed by a series of ritual episodes. The crew venerated the IBT, sacred substances, and the reed that restores W, the DD pillar's place. The narrative also suggests the destruction of a shelter, albeit in a vague and enigmatic manner. Fashioning of the perch. After the veneration of the IBT, the next event is described as arriving at the reed that shelters the throne, perch. The Shebtau then entered a place, restored the DD pillar, caused the primeval waters to recede, and venerated the DD pillar of the Ka. The Ka appears to have given instructions for fashioning the Jeba perch, with his presumed words reading, "Cut off the top, WPT, of the reed. Divide half of it, then lift this side from the cutting." Afterwards, the primordial waters subsided. The memory of the IBT returned, and the 2 Shebtu made their way to the water's edge, where the reed drifted past. They divided the reed, planting 1 cutting from it, and thus the perch, DBF, became the name of what stood in the water. The Falcon became Lord of Jeba, and Wetcheset Nater and the perch were created together. A scene of worship and a silent rite ensued, likely followed by a protective ritual. There is mention of a blessed command, and the further development of what was planned, although much of this narrative remains obscure. Planning the site of the temple. The Shebtu searched the BWHNM and removed protective symbols, including the likeness of the Ibu Ib, the Sekum bear, and the divine arm. All the creative deities gathered for a ceremony of praise, after which they declared the place, BW, as their property. The text does not specify which divine authority assigned this place to the god, but it seems the deities working on the foundation of the domain made this declaration. We invoke the IBT, implying their visibility. The Shebtu were then placed again in the place in which the things of all the earth were filled with power, resulting in the recession of the primeval waters. Following these actions, a place, BW, was planned, WDC, likely by the Shebtu. The sages, builder gods, Seshat, Tek, and the crew approached the Lord, and a ceremony of acclamation ensued. They declared the place fashioned, NBP, where the Ka ruled, enshrining the sovereign's blessed command and the Did pillar. The outcome was the subduing of the enemy snake. Planning the mansion. Tannen protected the site and seems to have led the Lord God to his final resting place. Uncertainty surrounds this text, which could potentially hold sacred spells that offered magical protection to the temple site prior to its foundation. The next action described is introducing a ritual book, though it remains uncertain whether this book concerned the rites of protection or the temple's foundation. The Edfu records do not include the actual laying out of the foundation ground for the temple in the Payland of Jeba, nor do they provide a physical description of the temple. One can only speculate that this mythical temple might have resembled the mansion of Wetcheset Nater.
This episode is brought to you by Fox One. Watch all 104 matches of the FIFA World Cup live in 4K for just $19.99 a month with 3 days free. Build your own multi-view, choose up to 3 streams, and follow player spotlights. Stay on top of every moment with live stats, highlights, and instant replays. The FIFA World Cup, streaming live on Fox One. Offers are subject to change. See fox.com for complete terms and conditions.
Part 3. Myth of the origin of the temples of the sun god. Part of a myth known as the coming of Rek to his mansion of Miss NBT survives in the 3rd, 4th, and 5th Edfu cosmogonical records. This myth pertains to another phase of the mythical age when the lands of the sacred domains were already established and the primordial houses of the gods were founded in places other than the original domains of the falcon. This myth presents a different understanding of sacred domain's origin than the first myth. Hinterland of the Were. The first scene takes place in the hinterland of the Waret, where the creation of several sacred places, or paylands, took place. These include 1. Island of Fury, 2. Mansion of Shooting, 3. Harma, 4. Nebwet, 5. Mansion of Mystery, 6. House of Combat, 7. Tannin Lot, and 8. Seat of the Two Gods. A group of gods, including the falcon, Thoth, the maker of substances, and the divine of heart, journeyed through the hinterland and arrived at a BW place where they seem to have created their dwelling. Unfortunately, the text offers no description of this location, nor clarifies whether this BW place refers to one of the sacred domains listed earlier or another site. This domain does not mention life or the resting places of the gods. The only detail is that an enemy serpent appeared after the gods settled. Creation of magical protection. At the landing stage of that domain, the enemy serpent, Re, appeared, prompting the planning of a crushing place, BWTT, and the formation of protective guards. The ancestor, Ms, settled there, with Thoth and Seishat sanctifying the members of the god's guard. Later interpretations suggest that the Earthmaker's command summoned and dispatched this protective company, known as the Soldiers, MSCW, of Tannin, to defend the place for crushing. The company consisted of 60 divine beings, divided into 4 groups, each under the leadership of a different creature. 14 hawks followed the first group chief, a hawk known as the Lord of the Spear. A lion known as the Lord of the Knife led the second group, which included 14 lions in its train. A serpent named Greatly Feared led the third group, followed by 14 other snakes. A bull named Great Roarer led the fourth group, which consisted of 14 bulls. These divine protectors, sanctified by Thoth and Seishat, took positions on the 4 sides of the place for crushing. The hawk positioned itself to the south, the lion to the north, the snake to the east, and the bull to the west. The fight against the serpent. The falcon led the battle against the serpent. The damaged and unclear text describing this part of the myth suggests a battle on earth before the divine shelter, followed by another battle in the sky where the falcon engaged the serpent named SBTY. The 4 groups of divine warriors protected the falcon in both battles. Eventually, the fighters overthrew the serpent and settled beside it. Re-Si, who became the lord of that place, purified the battlefield, foundation of the temple. Re-Si, the falcon, Tannin, and the creator gods of the temple, along with the ancestor, settled in the place for crushing after purifying the battlefield. The eldest of Wecheset Netter, Tannin, the Ogdoad, Re-Si, and the Sheptu participated in a ceremony to lay the foundation for Re-Si's outer enclosure, INB. The builder gods erected the walls of the divine shelter, IFDW, creating a structure that resembled an ancient sacred enclosure. Thoth and Seishat designed the first unit within this enclosure, a sanctuary known as SB, with dimensions of 90 by 20 cubits and 3 rooms. Further construction and rituals. They performed a new ceremony, the stretching of the cord, and planned a large court in front of the sanctuary. On the west and east sides, they erected 2 additional sanctuaries, each measuring 90 by 20 cubits. Though the text does not explicitly confirm it as the first solar temple, people likely regarded this early sacred enclosure as the site of the sun, God's first worship. Description of the first solar temple. The initial structure consisted of a chapel, SB, of 3 rooms, fronted by a large forecourt measuring 90 by 90 cubits and surrounded by an outer wall. Additional halls expanded this sacred area, creating a complex spanning 90 by 110 cubits. Later, they built a second temple, contiguous to the first, with similar dimensions and design. 2 walls encircled the temples, an outer enclosure measuring 400 by 300 cubits, and an inner enclosure measuring 110 by 240 cubits. The 2 temples within this smaller area dedicated themselves to the worship of the sun god and Tannin, consecration, and the festival of entering the temple. Thoth and Seshat informed Risi and Tannin of the completion of the sacred enclosure, after which their group of gods consecrated the site. Risi gave the temple the name Speedy of Construction and performed a ceremony to bestow names upon it. Risi Harakta then performed a ritual of adoration, declaring the temple to be a temple dedicated to the appearance of the god. The temple has a grand festival, including a procession of gods into the newly created temple, a temple commemorated in the Edfu inscriptions. Chapter 4. A brief survey of Egyptian sources on the origin of the temple. The attempt to interpret the cosmogonical texts from Edfu presents numerous challenges. Despite significant scholarly efforts, understanding the entire narrative's intricacies and symbolic allusions remains challenging. Yet, the events outlined in the preceding chapters seem to reflect, with a fair degree of probability, the essential elements of the Edfu cosmogonical records. The Edfu texts introduce us to perspectives that are new to our understanding of Egyptian temples. While it has long been known that the Egyptians placed the origin of their temples in primordial times, associating them with the concept of the god's seat of the first occasion, St. NSPTPY, the Edfu records offer a fresh outlook. The Egyptians envisioned the seat of the first occasion as the site where God first revealed himself, typically depicted as a sacred mound, sometimes called Y or Anci. The traditional view holds that this primordial mound was the original site of the temple. However, the Edfu texts present a more nuanced theory that extends beyond the conventional understanding. Similar evidence comes from Philae temple texts describing the temple as a primordial entity. Despite the frequent quoting of Philae's texts, no other records can match the length, depth, and richness of the Edfu texts. These newly unearthed records have not been considered in earlier studies, and their detailed accounts allow us to revisit many assumptions. The Edfu texts most significantly reveal that a historical event, like the foundation of a temple and its construction, occurs within a mythological context. They project the building of a temple onto a cosmic and mythical plane. This concept is not likely to have originated solely from the Edfu priesthood's doctrine. It is improbable that these cosmogonical texts were mere extracts from sacred books, specific to the Temple of Horus at Edfu or the Upper Egyptian priesthood. Instead, the sacred book, which forms the centerpiece of this study, offers a broader understanding, suggesting these texts were part of a much larger and more comprehensive tradition concerning the origin of sacred domains and temples throughout Egypt. The portion of this general theory that survives on the walls of the Edfu temple outlines the history of 2 gods' temples, the falcon and the sun god. The Edfu version of the sacred book provides brief accounts of the history of 2 falcon temples, one in Wechiset Nader and the other in Djeba. Similarly, it recounts the history of 2 sun god temples, the temple in the place for piercing and the mansion of Ms. NBT. Despite the lack of archaeological evidence, the Edfu records describe these temples as divine houses from the primordial age. The richness of these descriptions enables us to construct a coherent picture of the primordial world of gods, which the Egyptians believed predated the world of men and gave rise to these sacred temples. The Edfu texts provide us with all the growth phases of these temples. They explain the creation of the land that served as the temple's foundation, followed by the stages in forming these sacred places. They explain the successive developments of the temples, evolving from humble places of worship into the fully developed mansion of the god, Anbat-TTNTR. From an Egyptian perspective, mythological events tied to key moments in the primordial age influence each development phase, shaping the temple's growth. The descriptions portray these temples as works of the gods in physical, tangible structures. The precision of the descriptions suggests an attempt to chronicle the historical development of such early temples, now lost, alongside their mythological significance. As such, these records serve as a valuable source for understanding the history of Egyptian temples and provide insight into the mythological framework that governed their origin and growth. Thus, it would be highly beneficial to reconstruct the history of these temples, as there is little known about Egypt's early sacred sites, particularly the original cult centers of the falcon and the sun god. The accounts of the development of the falcon and sun god temples share common themes. The depiction of both temples reflects their long periods of growth, suggesting that the early places of worship at dawn were not as grand as the grand temples of history. However, depicting individual events in their development is not always uniform. The myths surrounding the falcon's temple differ from those concerning the sun gods. The myth of the falcon focuses heavily on events believed to have led to the establishment of the first temple at the world's beginning, whereas the sun god's temple myth is more concerned with the circumstances surrounding the temple's foundation and its gradual development. These differences align with the significance of the myth titles referenced in the introduction. Notably, Horus's or the falcon's name does not appear in the title of the myth about the falcon temple. The mythical age of the early primeval ones and the domain of the creator of the earth closely tie the origins and development of the falcon's earliest domain. Therefore, the first Edfu myth likely preserves a dual narrative. On the one hand, a depiction of the homeland of the early primeval ones, the place of creation, and on the other hand, a chronicle of the falcon cult's origins, detailing where and how it began. This myth is an invaluable document, offering a historical account of an Egyptian cult and its temple, indicating that the narrative reflects genuine traditions from a very early period. This suggests that, according to the implicit theory in these records, the falcon's primordial domain and temple were considered among Egypt's original sacred places. The study of the Edfu texts repeatedly reveals how closely the creation of the earth is associated with the origin of the falcon's sacred domains. This connection suggests the existence of an etiological myth regarding the creation of the earth as a prerequisite for the establishment of the falcon's sacred domains and their temples. Local traditions would have adapted this myth and incorporated it into Egypt's larger religious landscape. Thus, the history of the falcon's primordial domains offers valuable insight into the contents of the sacred book of the early primeval age of gods, BSW-RC and PSW-TYW-TPYW, shedding light on Egypt's earliest religious beliefs. The title of the second Edfu myth is The Coming of Re to His Mansion of Ms-NBT. This myth emphasizes the coming of God to his house, a key feature of this narrative. It likely describes a later stage in the temple's development. Interestingly, there is no mention of the early history of the sun god's domains, nor is there any reference to how the primeval domain of the sun god came into being. Unlike other Egyptian myths, this narrative does not include an origin story for the primeval pool from which the sun god and his domain would have emerged. Therefore, this myth appears to record the third period in the evolution of the mythical temples, when other gods began to establish themselves in the sacred domains once occupied by the falcon and his companions, leading to the founding of temples for them. The interpretation of the origin of sacred domains and temples differs significantly. It seems there were two separate theories, one regarding the creation of the sacred domains, and another concerning the later construction of temples on those domains. it appears that people conceived these mythical temples as later creations, often building them on lands originally associated with different gods. The evidence indicates that people viewed the creation of sacred domains as a divine act leading to the temple's origin. This supports the hypothesis that the sacred book of the early primeval age of the gods was the original text explaining the creation of sacred places. This book likely contained Egypt's earliest knowledge of how sacred places and temples existed. Over time, scholars added new myths to this foundational text, incorporating fresh traditions and expanding on the earlier stages of temple development. These additions reflected more advanced stages of thought about the creation of sacred domains and their associated temples. Another sacred book, mentioned in the Edfu inscriptions, provides insight into this subject, the B1W-RCN-GSPRW, or Sacred Book of the Temples. This brief examination of the major sources reveals that the origin of Egypt's sacred places, where the gods were first worshipped, and the subsequent development of these sites were not only a subject of intense interest, but also one of deep speculation. In the Edfu texts, there is much more than just myth. The recording of the two Edfu myths suggests that these texts embody a conceptual and philosophical history of sacred places and temples. The sages, according to the Edfu texts, believed in the wisdom of divine beings as the only ones who truly understood the creation of temples and sacred places. In addition to the cosmogonical records from Edfu, several other mythological texts discuss the origin of temples and sacred places. Typically, these texts are brief, frequently reduced to epithets, and could have originated from much older records. This supports the idea that the manner of writing about temple origins was not unique to Edfu, but part of a broader Egyptian tradition. However, the Edfu temple provides us with the most extensive documents. A stela from the reign of Nectanebo II at Hermopolis contains the earliest known record of such a text. This inscription equates the Hermopolitan temple with the primordial dwelling place of the Ogdoad, interpreting the actual temple as its renewal. Similar allusions to the original site of a temple can be found in the inscriptions of the tomb of Petosiris, where the Temple of Rek is believed to have been founded in a sacred pool, the place of Resi's birth and creation. Other references to the creation of sacred domains appear in the inscriptions of the Temple of Khonsu at Karnak. While these inscriptions do not form continuous narratives like those at Edfu, they provide extracts from cosmogonical records, hinting at the Karnak theory of temple origins. They mention a land that emerged from Nun before the creation of the High Hill, which was the birthplace of the Earthmaker. This High Hill's creation preceded the Palin's emergence and the existence of the sky, earth, and the underworld. Another passage mentions the creation of the Beyond, which precedes the S1J1W ground, the foundation that established the gods' domains. The jamb of the main door in the second pylon at Karnak presents a more connected narrative, providing an abbreviated version of a creation myth that explains the origin of Thebes. This myth describes the sacred land of Thebes as God's primeval domain, Saint DRC, originating from Nun and laying the groundwork for subsequent acts of creation. First, they created the Bay Mound, then the S1J1W ground, and finally, God's domain. The second part of this inscription describes the original site of the Theban temple through a series of epithets, evoking ideas similar to those found in the Edfu cosmological records. The inscriptions of the Temple of Opet contain a brief but significant reference to a creation myth. In these texts, the temple's connection to the primeval mythical time is expressed through epithets that describe it as the seat of the Earthmaker, the place where the sky was uplifted, the site of the All-Creator, the sky of the soul, the underworld of the mummy, and the place where everything was created at the beginning. Other names for the temple include the Palace of the Primeval Ones, the hymn homeland of the Ogdoad, and the Great Primeval Mound of the King of the Gods. These epithets are reminiscent of the Edfu texts, suggesting they are based on a similar prototype. The sources cited here demonstrate that the Edfu texts likely contain a theory of temple origins widely applicable across Egypt. In contrast, the temple at Dendera provides fewer details about its mythical past. One building text mentions the temple's construction on the site where God emerged from the lotus, describing it as the province of the creator of Re. People say that the primeval age, when God was born, laid the foundation for constructing the historical temple. Most other texts emphasize that Ta, the builder gods, built the historical temple according to Thoth's regulations. It is also worth mentioning the creation myths found at the temples of Esna and El-Hibi. These myths reflect a modified conception of the creation drama that gave rise to the temples, showing different ideas compared to the Edfu cosmogonical records. Although the Edfu texts do not provide a comprehensive description of the origin of sacred places, these sources still offer valuable insights into Egyptian beliefs regarding the creation of temples and sacred domains. On the other hand, there are examples of fundamentally different theories regarding the origin of sacred places. Some texts lack the concept of creation in the Edfu records, and others lack it. Instead, the divine abode is said to have originated on a mound, described as the place where God sought refuge during his battle with enemies, which later evolved into a constructed place of worship. The myth of Horus prominently expresses this idea, as does the legend about the conflict between Horus and Seth. Texts concerning the temple's origin at Kom Ombo also express a similar concept. What stands out in these narratives is that the central deity is Re. This suggests that the theory about the origin of sacred places is closely associated with the solar cult, reflecting Heliopolitan views on creating sacred domains. Unlike the Edfu cosmogonical records, these narratives do not explain the development of sacred mounds in phases. The narratives start when the gods inhabit these mounds without delving into their formation. As a result, these accounts seem to offer secondary interpretations rather than original descriptions of the creation of sacred places. For instance, the myth of Horus describes the foundation of the Jebba, referring to Re's arrival at Wetjeset Hor and his subsequent battle. However, the sacred places associated with these mounds do not correspond to those mentioned in the Edfu cosmogonical records. The temple's inscriptions at Medamud provide additional evidence, describing it as the mound where Re arrived. The narrative explains that Re came to this place while invoking the ancestors, renewing the site where they had created him. This implies a connection between the creation of the sacred place and ancestral worship, though it doesn't align with the creation narratives found in Edfu or elsewhere. Although there are affinities between texts from Karnak, the tomb of Osiris, and the Edfu records, especially in their focus on creation, none of these other texts presents a complete or continuous narrative about the origin of sacred places and temples. They do not detail the involvement of divine beings in the world's creation, sacred places, and temples as thoroughly as the Edfu texts. Only in the Edfu records do we find a relatively complete and logical account that supports the argument for their originality and overarching significance. Thus, the Edfu records remain the primary source for reconstructing the Egyptian theory of temple origins, transporting us back to a time when darkness still engulfed the world.
Meet the new iSIMS, the single talent acquisition platform that's fully future-ready. It works wherever and however you hire, with insights no one else offers. One solution that fits seamlessly into your existing tech stack, which is why IT and HR leaders trust it. With the best of enterprise-grade software and AI, iSIMS helps you identify and secure the right talent faster. iSIMS, powering exceptional hiring. Learn more at isims.com.
Chapter 5. The Island of Creation. The Edfu cosmogonical records begin with a depiction of the primeval island, believed to be the first home of the gods. The Edfu texts describe this world uniquely, unlike any similar series of texts we are aware of. Previous summaries have already provided some descriptions of this island, but it is essential to revisit the main features of the Edfu text's depiction. The god's primordial world is represented by an island, IW, partially covered with reeds and shrouded in darkness, situated amid the primordial waters, HBBT, which in this tradition is called Wakrit. While the names of the island, like the Island of Trampling, Island of Combat, and the Island of Peace, may not directly relate to the concept of creation, it is evident that this island marked the beginning of the world's creation and the foundation of the gods' earliest mansions. However, the principal sources do not describe the island's origin. According to the first cosmogonical record, divine beings inhabited the island during the primordial age. Nowhere in the main Edfu records is there a clear statement or hint about how the Egyptians envisioned the creation of the earth or the land of this island. The Edfu texts focus creative activity on the act of SWIBT, Tes, endowing the earth with its powers. This does not seem to involve the earth's initial creation or the island's origin, but rather the development of lands of special significance. These lands signify the second phase in developing the gods' primordial world, which we will explore further below. Explaining the Egyptian theory of Earth's origin and earliest form is complex. However, the significance of the island's origin in the Edfu sources warrants an attempt to outline Egyptian perspectives on the origins of the terrestrial world. Egyptian religious texts frequently allude to the world's creation, but these references are often formulaic and provide only partial insights into Egyptian cosmogony. Another challenge lies in the fragmented nature of the sources. The extant cosmogonical documents are often disjointed remnants of what might have been a more complete cosmogonical doctrine. We rarely encounter texts that offer a coherent account of creation's successive stages, which makes it difficult to reconstruct a full picture of the world's initial existence. The literary style of many cosmogonical documents often focuses on specific doctrinal themes or popular mythological events. These texts glorify the local god's role in the world's creation. An example is the Memphite doctrine of creation, preserved in the Shabaka stone, the hymn to Ptah in P. Berlin 3485, and a fragment of Memphite philosophy found in P. de Meerner's Berlin 13603. These three documents offer a generalized depiction of the world's creation, primarily aimed at promoting Ptah's role in the process. The Shabaka stone text overviews Egyptian creation beliefs, but does not give a detailed account of elementary creation. While the text emphasizes that Ptah, as the earth god, was the source from which the world and all beings evolved, it does not delve into the actual creation of the earth itself, nor does it describe the earth's earliest form. Similarly, the hymn to Ptah, P. Berlin 3048, presents Ptah as the oldest of the primordial deities, the Mesenti, the Lord of Begetting, who created all that exists in P. Dem. Berlin 13603 is a dogmatic composition, blending Heliopolitan and Hermopolitan views on the world's creation. This document asserts the creation of the earth and its divine inhabitants before Freya's birth, while clearly recognizing Heliopolis as the center of creation. However, the document does not describe Heliopolis's primordial aspect. Rather, the document suggests the existence of Heliopolis prior to the creation of the earth. From this primordial center, the earth god created the land, which received the name Memphis, Men-Nfr, and subsequently, he created the gods. Despite these documents offering some insight, they do not clearly explain how the earth god proceeded in creating the earth itself. Nor do they describe the first terrestrial world, where the gods lived. These gaps highlight the unique value of the Edfu texts, which offer a more complete narrative of the creation of sacred places and temples. Unlike other cosmogonical records, the P. Bremner Rind Papyrus's creation account explains that the Creator brought all existing things into existence when he came into being as Khopri on the first occasion. The Creator then established primeval time and primeval ones. This text emphasizes the concept of BPR, or becoming, and coming into existence, which was the work of the solely unique God. The creation of the terrestrial world is not mentioned in this document. Conversely, P. Berlin 3047 tells us that after revealing himself, the Creator first made the SRJJW, ground, to settle upon, during his emergence on the first occasion. Following this, the Creator created the earth, T, which led to the creation of everything else. By combining the views of P. Bremner Rind and P. Berlin, 3047, it appears that the Egyptians believed that after bringing all beings, BPR, into existence, the Creator fashioned a dwelling place for himself amid none, described as SLJ1W, from which he proceeded to create the world. This idea also appears in the creation myth inscribed on the temple's second pylon at Karnak. The myth alludes to the Creator's initial location, Saint DRC, believed to have arisen from Nun, where the Creator established his base to initiate the world's creation. However, none of these texts provide specific details about the creation process or explain the physical formation of the SLJ1W ground. The Egyptians seemed primarily interested in recording the results of creation rather than delving into the causes or mechanisms behind it. The world's creator may have envisioned this primordial ground, where the world's creation began, as a mound rising from the primeval waters, serving as his resting place. The Heliopolitan version of the creation myth, likely developed around the 5th dynasty, supports this theory. The pyramid texts partially reconstruct it, depicting the earth in its earliest form as a mound that emerged from the primordial water. Adam, the creator, resided upon this mound, which was considered divine, and from which he personified the 4 elements as divine beings. The Hermopolitan doctrine of creation reflects closely related ideas, describing the terrestrial world as a mound upon which the sun god revealed himself. We can conclude from these accounts that the primordial mound, sometimes referred to as I or BCI, served as the nucleus of the god's world during the primeval age, from which the physical world originated. However, the sources never explicitly explain the formation process of this mound. As previously noted, it seems the Egyptians conceived of the earth's creation as the land emerging from the primeval waters, triggered by the revelation of the Creator. The available evidence, particularly from the Heliopolitan and partly Hermopolitan sources, shows that Egyptian cosmogony does not offer an interpretation of the causes of creation or describe the natural forces involved. There's also no description of the god's primordial world. However, the main Edfu cosmogonical records present ideas of creation and the primeval age that differ from the generally accepted theories. The first Edfu cosmological record's description of the mythological context suggests this. In addition, certain allusions to mythical events found in other Edfu inscriptions, though not part of the main sources, provide further insight into the early period of the primeval world of gods and the mythological circumstances that mark the start of this creation story. From the Edfu texts, we know that the Egyptians believed the Earthmaker, Ert, created the grounds for the domains, Neiwt, of the gods. However, the details of how this process unfolded remain unspecified. The summary of the myth about the temple of the sun god's origin states that the Earthmaker's word created God's domain, Neiwt. However, the main Edfu sources do not support this idea, as they mention the Earthmaker, but do not credit him with creating the earth or laying the foundation for the divine domains. The text of a scene depicting the presentation of libation and incense shares a similar concept regarding the earth's origin. The Edfu temple's forecourt walls bear this inscription, which equates Horus the Beditite with Tannin and describes him as the god who created all that exists. The inscription calls him the Father of Fathers, the creator of gods and men, and the unique one without peers. He is also believed to be the CBC snake, responsible for creating the primeval ones, elevating the sky for the sun's disk, and creating the earth for his progeny. This passage suggests a tradition in which the earth god identified the first creative power, eventually represented as a snake with himself. Remarkably, the creation of the earth comes last in the creation sequence. The text implies that the earth was created for the earth god's intimate offspring, his successor in ruling the mythical world. However, similar to other sources, the text does not describe the process of creating the earth as a substance, nor its original form, upon which the earth god's successor would dwell. The Edfu inscriptions twice refer to a deity known as the first primeval one, P-Y-T-P-Y, equating him with the Great Lotus, N-B-B-W-A-R. People say this deity brought the earth into existence, fashioned it on a potter's wheel, and created men and gods. People call him the Lord of the universe and the first primeval one, as he existed before all others. The notion of fashioning the earth on a potter's wheel is foreign to the ideological background of the main Edfu records. These records never refer to the earth's creators as the P-Y-T-I-W-T-P-I-W, the primeval ones, nor do they suggest that these beings participated in the creation of gods and other living things. These later statements likely reflect a speculative theory from a later period. However, even these views provide clues for tracing the evolution of ideas regarding the creative powers that fashioned the early world of the gods. No doctrinal document from earlier or later periods provides a comprehensive account of the belief that the Earthmaker, IRTF, brought the earth into existence. The evidence from temple inscriptions consists mainly of brief texts that inform us that the Earthmaker existed before the world and all other gods, and that he initiated the world's existence. The name IRTF, however, seems somewhat arbitrary. One might speculate that the Egyptians initially attributed the creation of the earth to an unnamed or undefined power that eventually personified itself as a tangible deity. It is possible that the Heliopolitan doctrine concerning Adam was based on such an idea, and in a different tradition, the same power was simply called IRTF because the earth was seen as the result of this creative force. The above-cited text clearly alludes to the belief in an undefined power that created the earth by mentioning the first primeval one. This recalls yet another view of creation found in a formula accompanying the scene of offering the lotus, engraved on the outer wall of the naos of the Edfu temple. This ritual scene involves the adoration of the primeval ones, Pestutaiw, described as the gods who first came into existence, with all other beings following after them. The text accompanying this ritual offers an important perspective on Egyptian cosmogonical thought, with no known parallel. The invocation to these creative powers reads as follows: "Take to yourselves the lotus, NBB, which came into being at the beginning and drives away the storm cloud, even though it does not know it. You planted your seed in the BNNT, fertilized it with your phallus, WBJ, IWCW, and plunged it into none, uniting as one. May your air shine in the capacity of the stripling." This passage indicates a belief in a group of nameless deities who existed before the world's creation, acting as a single creative power. This passage and some other Edfu texts refer to these beings as Pashutayo, the primeval ones. The definition of these beings as existing before all other things aligns with descriptions of the earth god IRTs, frequently equated with Tannan in Edfu and other later sources. If we accept that these terms represent how Egyptians conceptualized the nature of the creator, or creators, responsible for producing the first substance of the earth, this text introduces us to the creators of the earth and reveals the original Egyptian notion of such a power. Since these deities acted collectively as a single creative force, it is unsurprising that the concept of a sole, unique creator evolved over time. Local traditions and beliefs may have assigned this sole creator various names, and this secondary theory may have dominated Egyptian thought during the historical period, replacing the original creative powers, PSWTW, with IRTJ, the maker of the earth. If this interpretation is accurate, the Edfu text implies that Egyptian cosmogony originally envisioned a multitude of nameless divine beings as the first supernatural power responsible for initiating the drama of creation. We can also deduce from this Edfu text that the original power's first act of creation was the fertilization of the BNNT. The Edfu text does not explain the exact nature of the BNNT, but some evidence suggests its significance. The Edfu inscription suggests that the seed of Nun, MTWT, N, and WN, symbolized as the lotus, NBB, brought everything into existence from the BNNT. Another reference to the BNNT appears in the Theban myth of creation preserved in the temple of Khonsu at Karnak, which states, "It's where Nun made the BNNT on the first occasion." Thus, the term BNNT denotes a specific location within Nun where a specific substance formed, albeit without elaborating on the creation process. The place where this substance solidified into the matter may have inspired the name Bent. The Bennett likely represents the space where the mystical union between the primeval ones, Pierajutel and Nun, occurred, and the inert substance that filled that space. After fertilization, the BNNT gained creative powers, enabling it to produce other substances. Interestingly, the Edfu text does not connect the word SWBT, egg, to this creation process. Furthermore, the Edfu texts equating the original creators with the earth god, IRTJ, invite speculation about the significance of the creative action it describes. The BNNT is believed to be the essential matter from which the elements of creation evolved, implying that the most fundamental terrestrial substances emerged from it. Despite the lack of additional relevant sources, the short Edfu text discussed here may reveal the original creator's nature and provide insight into the origin of the earth. Egyptians saw the BNNT as the embryo of the earth, imagining that the union of male creative power and Nun, the mother of the earth, produced the earth. Following this union and the fertilization of the BNNT embryo, solid matter emerged, believed to be the initial form of the earth. People might have envisioned the newly created earth as an island, EW, rising from the primeval waters. This hypothesis gains some support from the fact that the offering the lotus scene refers to an island, EW, which seems to be the original nucleus of the world. The names of these islands reinforce the concept that the earth was once an island upon its creation. These names summarize the doctrinal ideas and traditions the Egyptians likely connected to the original island from the primeval age. The Edfu texts refer to this island as the pool, which originated at the beginning, and goes by the province of the beginning and the island of the egg, a theory that envisions the earth in its primordial form as an island floating in Nun is already known. However, no text explicitly describes how the Egyptians imagined the earth's creation, the island's role in the process, or its function in the divine sphere. According to the analysis of the Edfu texts, the Egyptians believed the world's creation required establishing a small piece of land amidst the primeval waters, from which natural forces would operate to bring the world into existence. The Edfu texts proposed that the island of the egg, this primordial island, served as the actual foundation ground before the world's full creation. Another statement in the texts, accompanying a scene of adoration of the original creative powers at the Edfu temple, supports this view, stating that the GSJSW, or sages, created an SNJT, foundation ground, that preceded the formation of any terrestrial configuration, including the primordial mound, BCY. The main Edfu cosmogonical records further reinforce this perspective. The idea of creating a foundation ground before the world's formation, represented as an island, IW, may have originated from a myth of creation not yet fully known to us. The Edfu texts likely contain extracts from such a myth, focusing on the creation of the earth, T, and explaining the initial stages of the world's existence. The analysis of the offering the lotus scenes has facilitated the identification of numerous extracts that align with and expand upon the concepts presented in the previously examined texts. These extracts offer insight into the Egyptian theory of the development of the island of the egg during the early stages of its existence. The scene of offering the lotus, located in the forecourt of the Edfu temple, deserves special attention. The rite of offering the lotus includes the recitation of this text, which appears to be another extract from the supposed cosmic document. Its content is particularly significant, as it provides insight into what happened after the island of the egg emerged from none. This text shows us that the first event on the island was the creation of the Jeet, or form. The text does not describe the process of creating this physical form, but the primeval ones apparently fashioned their appearance. People believed that the primeval ones were self-created divine beings, bringing themselves into existence without needing a father or vulva to give them form. People described them as the seed of their own creation. This belief implies that the primeval ones existed in a somewhat insubstantial form while creating the island. Once the general substance of the world was brought into being through the fertilization of the Bant matter and manifested in the emergence of the island, it became possible for these divine beings to undergo a metamorphosis, assuming a physical form. Although the narrative does not explain how the Egyptians imagined the first divine physical embodiment, LT, this form played a key role in the next stage of creation. The existence of this LT, the bodily form of the primeval ones, directly led to the subsequent creative act on the island. The text accompanying the offering the lotus scene describes this event. Embrace the God who dwells in his pool. He was led, BS, from your embodiment, DT, even the great lotus that issued from the pool in the island of the two flames, the province of the beginning, which initiated light ever since the first occasion in the high hill, at the beginning of coming into existence. A similar view of creation is presented in the text of another offering the lotus scene on the outer face of the enclosure wall. Receive for yourself the God who resides in his pool, who initiated the radiance at the first occasion, even the great lotus that emerged from the pool in the island of the two flames, the province of the beginning. These passages suggest that the island of the egg was believed to be where the natural forces, embodied by the primeval ones, resided. After shaping their bodily forms, they performed further acts of creation that led to the formation of the world. These texts make it clear that the primeval ones were responsible for initiating the creation of the elements, especially the earth and radiance, the latter emerging from their physical form. A spell from the Edfu temple further elaborates this belief by praising these creative powers. The senior ones, WW, who worshipped Risi, created everything that hadn't yet emerged on the high hill's edges, NPRT. Therefore, people understood the island of the egg as the site of the element's creation. The narrative does not provide further details about the nature of the SWBT, egg, formed after radiance. It is possible that this SWBT represented the embryo of the next generation of gods and other living beings. The spells from the ritual text of offering the lotus may preserve aspects of a cosmogonical document that is otherwise unknown, offering valuable insights into the Egyptian understanding of the earliest terrestrial world. According to these texts, the first world of the gods began on a Senjt, foundation ground, which the Egyptians referred to as the Island of the Egg. A prominent feature of this island was a pool, although its origin remains unmentioned. However, it appears that someone later extended the island by creating a mound. Both texts translated mention the syllable, high hill, though they do not explain its creation. Given the close connection between the island and the hill in this creation narrative, it is plausible that the same powers that fashioned the island also fashioned the hill, representing a secondary terrestrial configuration in creating the primordial world. This hypothesis is consistent with the sages' account of creation, which depicts the primordial mound as a secondary creation that came after the foundation, S and JT, both of which were created by the same creative powers that created the island. The Egyptians seem to believe that the island and the hill predated the formation of the SSPW, ground. Another Edfu inscription related to the creator states, "Thou hast led forth the bay mound when the SPW ground had not yet existed. The BBBT primeval water is still lying around." This implies that the formation of the SSPW ground marked the completion of the primordial world's creation. People believed that the gods founded their first sacred abodes on this ground. Here, The Edfu account of creation concludes with the completion of the formation of the first terrestrial world. Interestingly, these extracts describe radiance, but do not mention the creation of the sky, stars, or other celestial bodies. People claim that the lotus emitted radiance, but it remained within the island's pool. It appears that this radiance illuminated the primordial waters from the ground during the island's initial period of existence. The Edfu texts show some similarities with the Hermopolitan doctrine of creation. The Hermopolitan view centers around a myth in which an egg is considered the essential material of creation. This doctrine also posits that the world in its initial form was an island with a pool from which Re was born. We named this island the Island of the Two Flames. Based on the Edfu texts, it is possible that the theory of world creation presented here may have been influenced by Hermopolitan ideas, or even originated from Hermopolis. The identification of the primeval ones, PSWTYW, with the Ogdoad, the group of 8 deities central to Hermopolitan cosmology, in 2 instances, supports this. The ritual text in Edfu describes the PSWTYW, but the gods represented are the Ogdoad. Additionally, in 3 instances, Edfu describes the original island of creation as the pool of Hermopolis. This evidence makes denying the relationship between Edfu's creation theory and Hermopolitan ideas impossible. The Edfu texts accompanying the offering the lotus scenes likely draw inspiration from the Hermopolitan myth of creation. However, the Hermopolitan texts do not refer to the original island as the Island of the Egg, but as the Island of the Two Flames. The Edfu texts reveal an intriguing alternation between Island of the Egg and Island of the Two Flames when referring to the same land. It is possible that the name Island of the Two Flames originated from Hermopolitan tradition in connection with the belief that Re was born on this island and emitted radiance from his 2 flaming eyes. In his notable work on Egyptian cosmogony, Seth emphasized the Heliopolitan doctrine as the oldest, tracing it back to prehistoric times. According to the Heliopolitan belief, the Nun existed before all things, and from this primordial water, the sun god rose to create the world. Seth also recognized the Hermopolitan system as prehistoric, noting that it presents the Ogdoad as the creative powers that arose from Nun, bringing light and forming the primordial hill. However, neither the Heliopolitan nor Hermopolitan doctrines clearly explain how Adam or the Ogdoad created the primeval world. Crucially, none of the main Egyptian cosmogonical doctrines describe the full range of functions that the island of creation was believed to have played in shaping the primeval world of the gods. In contrast, the Edfu texts offer explanations for the causes of creation. We observe notable differences when comparing the Hermopolitan theory, gleaned from Theban tomb texts and the inscriptions of Osiris, with the Edfu sources. The Edfu texts present a detailed creation myth that appears to be of a much earlier origin. It is plausible that there was a single original myth concerning the island of creation, predating the elaboration of the Hermopolitan and Heliopolitan doctrines. We suggest that the Edfu texts contain concealed ideas later adapted into the creation myths of various religious centers in historic Egypt. 2 features of the Edfu myth stand out as being absent in both Hermopolitan and Heliopolitan traditions: the focus on the origin of the primary matter and the role of nameless natural forces represented as divine powers in the creation of the world. The Edfu texts agree with the common Egyptian belief that the Nun existed before all things, and from this primordial water emerged the first creative power. The Edfu cosmogony adopts a naturalistic view, emphasizing the creation of the primary substances, water and earth. This view was likely familiar to the cult centers of the Thinite period. Although the origins of these beliefs remain uncertain, the Edfu texts suggest that there was an alternative theory to the predominant Heliopolitan cosmogony, one that emphasized the creation of physical substances rather than divine beings. The Edfu creation theory's key concern is the Earth's origin. The essential feature of this theory is that, in the beginning, a nameless creative power existed in a dark and empty space, along with the B and NT embryo floating in the primordial water. People saw this embryo, BNNT, as the nucleus of the BPR process, or the coming into being of the substances. The nameless creative powers fertilized the BNNT embryo, giving rise to the primordial terrestrial substances that formed the world's foundation. The creation of the island marked the first phase of this process. In the second phase, the physical form, DT, came into existence, which was of divine nature and represented the bodily form of the first generation of gods, the Pesotiu, or primeval ones. Despite the loss of their precise appearance, their existence undoubtedly paved the way for the next stage of creation. The lotus emerged from the primordial mound, the source of the radiance. The Edfu texts view the lotus as the source of radiance, an essential element of creation. This suggests that the original substance manifested in three physical forms: the island, the LT embodiment of divine nature, and the lotus that emitted radiance. Another distinctive feature of the Edfu cosmogonical theory is its organic perspective on creation. The formation of the earth is conceived as the result of an organic and physical process driven by the interaction of natural forces, represented by Nun and the nameless powers, Same. The Creator imagined these powers, Sakhemo, in an undefined form at the beginning of creation. The theory does not address the creation of the stars and other celestial bodies. While it includes the creation of certain beings, these are believed to have emerged as a direct consequence of the island of creation, or through the same creative process that brought the island into existence. Therefore, this theory incorporates the origin of radiance, believing it to be a product of the same natural forces responsible for creating the island. In sum, the Edfu texts present a view of creation that differs from the Hermopolitan, Heliopolitan, and Memphis cosmogonical systems. None of these three doctrines address the initial phases of creation or provide a detailed description of the natural forces involved as seen in the Edfu sources. The Heliopolitan and Memphite traditions intertwine the creation of the earth and radiance with the creation of the rest of the world. In contrast, the Edfu records separate these phases, focusing specifically on the creation of the earth and radiance. Moreover, while the Heliopolitan and Memphite doctrines depict creative powers and elements as personified deities with specific names, the Edfu texts emphasize nameless powers, SBMW. This distinction holds significance as it implies that the creation myth in the Edfu records could mirror beliefs from a time when Egyptians revered solely nameless natural forces. The lack of named divine personalities in this cosmogony strengthens the argument that the Edfu texts preserve fragments of the oldest Egyptian conception of the earth's creation. The order of creation described in the Edfu texts is logical, suggesting that this previously unknown myth of creation may have influenced the formation of the major Egyptian cosmological doctrines. Despite the absence of other supporting documents, we are inclined to believe that the Edfu text's account of the origin of the primordial island and its role in creating the physical world of gods and humans reflects genuine beliefs from an
Ryan Reynolds here from Mint Mobile with a message for everyone paying big wireless way too much. Please, for the love of everything good in this world, stop. With Mint, you can get premium wireless for just $15 a month. Of course, if you enjoy overpaying, no judgments, but that's weird. Okay, one judgment. Anyway, give it a try at mintmobile.com/switch.
Upfront payment of $45 for 3-month plan, equivalent to $15 per month required. Intro rate first 3 months only, then full price plan options available. Taxes and fees extra. See full terms at mintmobile.com.
Ancient era.